you know what a bottle episode is, Taplines listener? Yeah? No? I had to double check the definition myself to make sure I did. I did, mostly. It's a term from television production for a low-lift sitcom episode that takes place all on one set with as few cast members as possible and a self-contained plot, like in a bottle. Today, we're doing a Taplines version of that. Call it a beer bottle episode. Or don't. Maybe you're wondering what the hell I'm talking about. Fair, you know. The upshot is we're putting our normal Taplines format on the shelf today, and rather than an interview with one industry insider about a pivotal moment in the American beer history, we're hanging out with two of my favorite industry journalists, Kate Bernot of Taplines and Jess Infante of Brewbound, to talk about two turning points in the National Sud saga that they're particularly fascinated by. Some of you listening may know the three of us collectively as the Beer Byliners, the name of a Twitter space, man, remember those, that we hosted in the early days of the pandemic. Well, we're getting the gang back together today, and you're coming with. Stay tuned for a chat about the unveiling of the Brewers Association's Ozymandian 20% by 2020 mantra, the dark side of Cleveland's infamous Stroh's-fueled 10-cent beer catastrophe in the 70s, and much more. It's Kate Bernot and Jess Infante. It's the Byliners as Tapliners. It's how sometimes the road to brewing industry hell is paved with good intentions. And it's all right here, right now, on Vine Pair's Taplines. Listener, you know Mighty Ducks 2? D2? The Mighty Ducks are back? Sure you do. I mean, it's an iconic moment in cinema, moment in time. We have a little bit of a D2, the Mighty Ducks are back moment in Taplines time today because, you know, at the beginning of the movie, they go around, they're on the rollerblades, they're doing the thing like, everyone's coming back to the team. Gordon Bombay rides again. We've got something similar happening. Today on Taplines, we've got bylines. We've got byliners. I'm talking, of course, about my fellow erstwhile former Twitter space compatriots and beer beat colleagues, Kate Bernot and Jess Infante, who are joining us on Taplines for a crossover episode that no one demanded, but people I think will be pleasantly surprised to receive in their feeds. And if they're not, don't reach out. Not interested in feedback. Kate and Jess, welcome to Taplines. We're so glad to have you.
Hi.
Hi, Dave. That was amazing.
Which D2 character would each of you like to be for this episode? Obviously, I'm Goldberg. I'm Goldberg, obviously.
Are we doing that?
Yeah,
is that what we
are.
do? Okay, good.
And Emilio Estevez will be kind of like a love interest, but not for us, but for people older than us. But it's like still a kid's movie, so they don't really develop that storyline. That same thing will happen on this podcast. I'm not sure how we're going to integrate that. We'll fix it in post. Our producer, Darby, will have to layer that in once he gets into the booth. But guys, welcome to the show.
It's great.
Thanks for having us. It's awesome to be here. I would posit potentially a hot take that D2 was one of the few sequels to maybe be better than its original.
Yes, famously so.
But I said this to friends over the summer about Home Alone, and they told me I was a sociopath. So,
oh, you think Home Alone 2 is better than Home Alone 1?
I think it's just as good.
Yeah, it's definitely just as good, I think. But Donald Trump makes a cameo. Not great.
No.
That's 10 fucking demerits for whatever. Is it Gryffindor?
Well,
Gryffindor is the house.
My friends pointed out that there's no real purpose to Kevin beating up on the wet bandits because the house is unoccupied. I don't know.
Yeah, that was like a metaphor, I think, for sort of like Clintonian liberal sort of super predator carceral, you know, I'm pretty sure that's what was going on there.
The fact that you can pull this like off the top of your head is astounding.
Yeah, John. Meanwhile, our poor listeners are just developing a brain contusion as I continue to not address the actual content of this episode. Kate, where are you calling in from? Where are you joining us from today?
Beautiful Missoula, Montana.
What's
the way
the weather
from
like?
The wilds. Weird. Very smoky. Lots of wildfire smoke currently. But we're going to get some snow potentially later this week, which that's our seasons. We go straight from wildfire into snow. So We're all looking forward to it though, because it gets rid of the smoke and fall's here, I guess.
Yeah.
That's a trade-off.
Better
Yeah.
things aren't possible. It's either wildfire smoke or snow in mid-September.
Those are the choices.
Yeah, that's right. Jess, where are you joining us from today?
I am in Salem, Massachusetts.
Are you feeling witchy?
I am feeling very witchy, and so are the hordes of tourists that have already descended upon us. For the season.
Already.
We're recording this in the second week of September. That was going to be my follow-up question. Is it's in full swing, huh?
Yeah, it's nuts. Like I was downtown a lot this weekend, and the Witchlerette parties are out in full force.
Is that a full calendar year thing or no?
No. I would say our spooky time is like Labor Day to Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Does the city council get together to discuss that officially? It's like, when does spooky time begin this year?
Honestly, yeah.
May it
like,
be so. Yeah.
we just had a mayoral election. Last year, the year before, our mayor became the lieutenant governor of the state, so we had to replace her. And like the tourist situation is like a huge deal because like the city basically breaks even on like how much they have to pay in overtime for police and DPW, and it's something.
Yeah, and
I
how much
blame-
they collect in like payroll tax and
Yeah.
all the visits. Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
Cool. So that's kind of sucks, but is kind of cool, or no? Or does it totally suck for you at this
No,
point?
it's a little bit of both.
Yeah. Are you feeling autumnal? Like, will you start to drink perhaps a nice pumpkin beer, or in October? I guess we're a little early for pumpkin, but you could have a Marzen and a delicious, refreshing fest beer.
No, because this week is like beach weather.
Oh.
And I'm trying to get myself a mental health day on Friday so I can have the one solo beach day I wanted to have all summer.
Yeah.
And after that, I'll be ready. But
Okay.
May it be
Cool.
so.
I'm not there yet.
We'll circle back later on. Listeners, for those of you who aren't familiar with Kate and Jess and why this podcast episode is a little bit different than previous episodes of Taplines that you may be familiar with, we're doing something a little different today. I warned you in the intro. This is a little bit of a bottle episode, a beer bottle episode. This is self-contained. This is staged. This is scripted. We're going off script, I suppose. Kate and Jess are two of the preeminent journalists on the American beer beat, along with your humble Taplines host, Dave Infante, and myself. I'm in rarefied air. I'm lucky to even be in the conversation with them, literally or figuratively. Kate and Jess and I have been reporting on the beer industry together. What, a combined, I don't know. I've been on for 14 years. Kate, what have you been doing?
I usually say about 12 at this point.
Yeah, a dozen. Jess, what about you?
Look at you guys. I'm just a little baby. I'm coming up on 5 years.
What?
Well, because she had
What were you doing before?
I was working in beer.
Yeah.
But not as a journalist.
You know what they call that, listeners? That's a leading question. And I led Jess right into it. Jess joins us formerly of the craft beer industry. So not only does she have the tools to break news and write excellent clarifying prose about this big, beautiful, strange beer business that we got going on, but she also has the inside knowledge of the inner workings of how the sausage gets made, or I suppose the saison, excuse me, mispronunciation. We'll have to fix that in post too. And Kate, tell us a little bit about what you're up to over at Sightlines.
Yeah, so I am the lead analyst at Sightlines, which is a beverage alcohol industry subscription newsletter focused a lot on consumer insights and data. And I write that with my wonderful co-author, Brian Roth. And there is so much to dig into. I mean, both Brian and I come from the beer side, but now our subscribers span beverage alcohol, and that's been really fun to be able to take that larger multi-tiered, multi-category look at the industry. That's been really fun. Just wrapped up a really big multi-part report on draft beer and the opportunity there, as a lot of folks are kind of ignoring that segment, I think, to their detriment, because there's some...
I thought I thought draft beer was dead, Kate. I don't understand.
It lives on, I assure you. It exists.
We gotta kill it. I thought I had finished it off. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Try as you may, Dave. Like a zombie, it rises. It's out there. It's kicking, and because people have assumed its death, there's some pretty easy wins for distributors and suppliers that choose to focus on it. So we kind of quantify what some of that opportunity is and took a look at case studies of people who are selling a lot of draft beer.
Ooh, we got some actionable insights.
Actionable insights.
We love it. We love the value proposition at Sightlines. I'm an avid reader. I'm, of course, also an avid reader of Brewbound. Jess and the team over there do a fantastic job. Frankly, if you're not reading both of those publications, I don't really know what you are reading on this beat. Certainly, you're not getting a full picture of what's going on. Go check it out, listeners, especially those of you in the trade. You need to be up on what these two are publishing. Guys, we got a lot to do today. We've got a lot to get through. It's a double guest episode. Darby saw you both jump on the recording earlier in pre-production and was startled. I didn't warn him that we were going to be a two for today, so that's a big deal. We've got a little bit of a different approach today. Instead of having one person on to tell me about a moment of beer history that they were involved in and bringing us back, we're gonna do a little secondhand retelling about two journalists on the beer beat and what their little moments of historical fascination on this beat are. I, of course, as listeners know, I'm a student of brewing history. You guys are as well. I've got all these books behind me. I've read many of them. I swear, and Kate and Jess, you guys are some of the most well-educated journalists on this beat, and I've asked you here today to talk a little bit about your moments of historical fascination with this, with the American brewing industry. With that said, where would you like to start? Typically, I will ask the guest to fire up the Taplines time machine and take us back to a year. Why don't I hand it like the conch shell? How do you say it? Conch?
I think you can do
conch.
either.
Conch. All right, like the conch shell in Lord of the Flies, but hopefully less violent. I'm going to hand the Taplines time machine, Kate, to you. I would love for you to start us off. Where should we go back to? What year should we scroll back to in history to discuss your moment of fascination?
Okay. I am going to put us in the time machine. We are going to Portland, Oregon in 2015. So
nice.
Yeah. So this is...
I don't know why I did that. I'm so embarrassed that I just did the sound effects.
Nope. That's
oh my God.
Correct.
I've never even done that before. I'm so nervous.
Don't be nervous, but do keep doing sound effects. So, okay. Portland, picture this. Portland, 2015, Sub Pop Records t-shirts, debates over hipsters, still a thing. Craft Brewers Conference is happening in Portland. My first Craft Brewers Conference, fun fact. So this was kind of a seminal moment for me covering this industry, and I think for the interplay between craft beer and other beer. This was the platform, the stage for the Brewers Association trade group to make its famous declaration: craft beer is going to be 20% of U.S. beer by volume by the year 2020. This is my moment that I've chosen.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And this proclamation that this, was within reach, actually got added to the BA's mission statement. Like, this is written down on some, scroll somewhere in Boulder, Colorado. Actually,
that's how it works. Yeah.
That's how mission statements work. Everyone knows this.
They chisel it into a boulder in Boulder, Colorado.
Exactly.
That's the only way.
Few people know this. But that actually happened in March of 2014. But I feel like this the 2020 goal line didn't really like reach the trade and public consciousness till Craft Brewers Conference 2015, when it was like everywhere and there were seminars about it and et cetera. And the reason I find this so fascinating is, like, spoiler alert, it didn't happen. But I'm curious about how, like, the sort of like thinking behind it, the strategic thinking, the machinations of like why this was worth proclaiming and why then, and to what degree did the industry believe this was possible? Because what I learned in kind of going back and researching this, and not just, kind of relying on my own memories of it, but was that like people were kind of raising their hands at the time and being like, are we though? Which
that seems like a lot of market share.
They're doing the math and they're just like, I don't know, man. But I feel like that was not part of my memory of that time. Like, my memory of that was just everyone was like double fist pump in the air at CBC, like 20% by 2020. I kind of glossed over the few folks who were not like, like pissing on the fire, but saying like, are we?
Right.
So that part is fascinating to me. And then, obviously the sort of, how do you walk that back? How do you put the genie back in the bottle after you've laid out a goal like that?
Well, it's a lot easier to do, Kate, if you don't have pesky fucking journalists bringing it up many years later after everyone's mostly forgotten about it.
Yeah, well, that's what we're good for, if nothing else.
20% by 2020 is such a good moment in time to go back to. Jess, do you remember I didn't know that 2015 CBC was where it first made its cotillion entrance to the vernacular of craft brewing. What a hackneyed analogy there. But I didn't realize that that's when it entered the ether. I do remember the phrase very much. And listeners, for those of you who are maybe like scrambling for a little bit more context here, as Kate said, the Brewers Association, which was then, I would say, sort of had as many of the Infinity Stones as it ever would, is nearing the zenith of its powers in terms of cohering a constituency of small independent brewers. This is before even we're about halfway through the feeding frenzy that Anheuser-Busch InBev was then underway with. This is way before the Canarchy roll-up goes over to Monster in early 2022 or whatever. Tilray Brands is not even a glimmer in the eye of any of the brewers that would very thankfully find an exit with them in 2023 and 2024. So this is a moment where all things are possible through God, as far as the BA is concerned. God, non-denominational. We're a non-denominational podcast here at Taplines. But Jess, do you remember this moment? Like, what's your recollection of when did you first encounter 20% by 2020 as like a catchphrase?
Honestly, when I started hanging out with you guys.
I'm so sorry.
But this lends a lot of credence to my thesis that Kate is single-handedly keeping this on people's radars, which is awesome.
Hashtag never forget.
In 2015, I not to make this about me, but I was working on the brand team of one of the largest craft brewers in the country, and we did not know about this, think about this, care about this. This was immaterial in my life at the time. I sadly was not attending, 20 by 2020's debutante ball. But
you had your gloves, the lace gloves, you had the dress, you were ready to go. You didn't get the look. I'm sorry.
No, I wasn't invited.
Yeah.
No, yeah. This was not even a thing that I was aware of until we started talking about it. But shortly, before that happened was when the BA changed the definition of a craft brewer to raise the barrel cap from 2 million to 6 million. And back in those days, the brand, I'm I don't think anything bad's going to happen. I mean, I think we can tell everybody where I was working. I was
It's up
working
to
at
you.
Sam Adams. And in those days, I think it probably looked like maybe the Sam brand could get there, certainly past the 2 million barrel ceiling, which I think it did at one point, but now they're below 2 million. And that is inclusive of Dogfish Head and their other little craft brands.
They're little guys.
I think craft beer was just kind of high on its own supply back in those days. But Dave, I know you said it was halfway through the feeding frenzy. I think it's still a little even earlier than that.
Yeah.
Like, would 20 by 2020 happen if all those barrels didn't go out to what the BA thinks is not craft?
That's a really good question.
Right? Like, if New Belgium were still in the fold, would we have gotten there?
If New Belgium were still in the fold, if Elysian were still in the fold, they lose Golden Road.
Bells.
Noted juggernaut Golden Road. Well, Bells, right? They start, and then Stone, obviously, by 2022. Yeah, that's a really good question. Let's come back to that, though, because I do want to talk a little bit about Kate's experience in 2015 and sort of, you're 9 years earlier in your career reporting on the beer industry. This was a much more halcyon era. I think everyone, that's basically a theme of this podcast, to the extent that we look beyond the craft industry, of course, but when we are talking about the craft brewing industry, we're doing a lot of looking back on the salad days. These were the salad days. What's your recollection of, what was your relationship with craft beer at this point? Were you a judge yet? Like, I don't want to make you sound like a homer for the industry. You never have been, but you, I think, certainly you've become more jaded since hanging out with me.
I think I was probably fresh off my beer judge certification. I was an editor at Draft Magazine at this time, which was a dedicated craft beer magazine. So I covered exclusively the craft industry for people who care enough about craft beer to subscribe to a craft beer magazine. So I think my lens on it, right? My lens on this was slightly different than, like, I guess maybe it would be now. And I didn't choose this moment to, like, dunk on the BA for coming up with this, because, like, there were a lot of reasons to think that perhaps, like, it wasn't like some stupid thing that they, hadn't thought about. I looked at, so I'm in Portland for Craft Brewers Conference. The two breweries that I most remember being excited to go to while I was visiting were Cascade and the Commons, neither of which exists anymore, which really says something. But everyone was super stoked about those. Yeah. Yeah. They were great. But, like, lines down the block, brewers really stoked about it. I looked this up. So listen to this, like, made me do the exploding head emoji. At the time that this 20% by 2020 goal got set, the Oregon Brewers Guild reported that 20% of the beer by volume consumed in Oregon was made by just Oregon craft breweries. And a whopping 60% of all draft beer consumed in Oregon was made by Oregon craft breweries.
Whoa.
Doesn't that hurt your brain?
Yeah, a lot.
So the industry is gathered in this place that is, like, living the dream. That is the vision of what they want to get to nationally. And it feels like, Oregon is just ahead of the curve, right? Like, oh, surely this is a vision of our national future. And if we look at the national statistics, in 2012, craft market share was 6.5% by volume. So, like, it had been essentially doubling in that time. Like, there was precedent to think that this could happen. So I want to give, credit where it's due, that this was not just, like, something someone made up for no reason.
Right.
What was craft's volume share in 2019?
Don't have it offhand. Not quite. Certainly not
8.
Like, did they get close?
No.
Already by 2017, Bart Watson like told reporters like this is a long shot.
Well, look, we made some bets. They didn't always. Not every bet pays off. And
because if
thanks for coming to the press release.
If you look at the trajectory of craft would have to continue growing at the same pace on larger volumes, right? So like that compounding interest kind of thing. Like it's easy for categories to grow exponentially when they're really small. Like we saw this with non-alcoholic beer, with like spirits-based seltzers, which are still like a third of the volume that malt-based seltzers are, right? Like it's easy to grow fast when you're brand new and there's no precedent.
Yep. And I mean, the product was more novel. So not only are you getting benefit from like the way fractions work, you're also getting benefit from the way like consumer interest works, right? Where like in 2015, there were still vast swaths of the country whose access to craft beer began and ended at Blue Moon and Sam Adams, which, there's reason to believe, at least if you're within sort of fortress craft, so to speak, and you have an incentive as the trade group to take the glass half full approach, there's reason to believe like, okay, like as we continue to penetrate and like people continue to understand the value proposition of craft beer, like maybe like the bull cases could be, Plus, it sounds really good, which is important. 20% by 2020 is a very good slogan.
Sounds incredible. And it's not as though the craft industry didn't grow after that, right? It's not as though, like, we have almost double the amount of breweries that we did in 2015.
Right.
The growth did continue, but what that real volume goal would have needed is for, like, the largest breweries in the country at the time to essentially, like, keep doubling, which is just like not how the long tail, that's where the growth came from, was the smaller guys. So it's just, I don't know, like it wasn't totally unfounded, but it just proved to not be what the industry ended up doing. And I appreciate the couple folks in the room who kind of raised their hands. Friend of the pod,
who were they,
if I may say, Benj Steinman gave a presentation at the very same CBC, at the same thing, titled "Craft Continues Climbing, but Ascent Gets More Complicated." And his headline for the presentation was "Halfway Home?" ? Like, good on you, Benj.
Oh, man. Benj,
I love Benj so much. Listener,
for those not familiar, Benj, longtime editor and publisher of Beer Marketers Insights, the OG, one of the OG trade publications that's been covering the space for, God, I think they've been in since the 70s. A long time commentator in the industry and always a straight shooter and a sweet guy. Shout out to Benj. Benj, we got to get you on the podcast someday. But I love that he was counter programming the BEA's own conference at the BEA's conference.
Was that like a seminar?
It was a seminar.
Did he like immediately follow Bart Watson? He was like, "Oh, thanks for the mic, Bart." Anyway, like I don't think so.
I'd have to look at I'd have to look at the schedule again. But it was a breakout, and it was in the intermediate track. It was like, you may not be ready for this knowledge unless you are like an intermediate brewer. Right. But he made. You can find his slides online. Shout out to the internet. Forever, just
the rapidly deteriorating Google search is still good for something. Yeah.
He makes an excellent point that is just like, how much IPA can America drink? Right?
And
like, it was just craft was so IPA dependent. And he's like, you mean to tell me that like there's twice this many people who want IPA?
And IPA then is not the IPA of now.
No, great point.
No, we're talking about like very well balanced like West Coast IPAs, not like smash mouth juice bomb type things.
But like everything's super bitter and is
yes, well balanced is not even the right way to say it. Yeah, you're right. You're
like
right.
the juice stuff is probably easier in some way to drink. But yeah, I mean, Benj was just like, do this many people want IPA? And in that sense, I think this is a really good, like if we don't even just think about beer, if we think about like some other kind of product that also has a specialty subset like coffee or cheese or something, it's like isn't there just like a natural ceiling of like how much specialty coffee or how much fancy cheese Americans are ever gonna pay for? Like, regardless of what a trade group does.
I have a counterpoint that kind of crosses over into our lane. Maybe this is the exception to the pros of the rule. Chobani and Greek yogurt. Mr. Chobani, of course, would take his fortune from his massive yogurt empire that he built and buy Anchor in May 2024. So, and again, I think there's very few examples of this. Like, who would have thought that Greek yogurt would be the juggernaut that it is? But I guess it's, maybe like in some isolated instance it's possible. But yeah, you're right. For the most part, it's like, all right, how far could this really go?
I'm hearing put protein in craft beer.
It's time.
Strain the beer a little bit more.
I'm fucking sick of all you brewers beating around the bush.
I need
call Jack Oak out of debtor's prison or wherever he is. It's time for super creatine craft beer. I'm ready. But my body is ready.
12 grams of protein in my IPA at minimum.
Brewery in Boston, they've since changed, but their original point of differentiation was that they put protein in the beer.
Where did it come from?
Why?
Are you allowed to just I don't like that at all. I assume they had some issues with the
FDA?
Yes.
No, the FDA.
Can they regulate beer?
I don't know.
Can they regulate protein?
Well, they don't. But I think when you start doing stuff like that, you're basically sending them a bat signal.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The Four Loko lamp activates and flashes on the the clouds in the sky. And Dr. Joshua Sharfstein, listener who, by the way, go check out our episode with him on Taplines. He's the man who was leading the probe at the FDA about Four Loko back in 2009, 2010. He awakens in the night in a cold sweat and says, protein beer? Not on my watch.
The beer that drinks like a steak? Well, I never.
I regulate steak, motherfuckers.
You messed with the wrong guy.
The wrong diligent public health professional.
Those brewers are dead now.
20% by 2020 would go down as kind of, I don't know. You're right, Kate. It's not, I don't see it as total hubris and ridiculous. And Bart Watson, who I guess came up with the figure, or at least was maybe. It
was kind of, I don't know. Gary Fish was kind of the one out there kind of promoting it at the time. Anyway,
the president?
Who was the BA board president at the time. But I kind of wanted to bring it up, not to dunk on it, but to do a sort of you're wrong about style complication of there was a world in which this maybe was possible. It changed so fast that now it looks hubristic or whatever. But there was a world in which this was within, even if they didn't get to 20, if they got to 19, whatever. There was a world in which this was within reach.
Yeah. Well, this brings us to Jess's counterfactual. This is a good time to come back to it because in 2015, whether we were midway through ABI's buying spree or maybe in the first third, and maybe it was backloaded a little bit more towards the end of the decade. I don't have the dates right in front of me, but the point stands that macro brewers became extremely interested in buying their way into the craft brewing segment that decade. And you brought up the good point earlier, Jess, of how much of it was that craft brewing as a segment was losing velocity versus craft brewers that were adding barrels to the segment were getting picked off by macro brewers, at which point the Brewers Association's definition of a craft brewer excluded them. Let's discuss.
The breweries that the big guys were buying, none of them were that huge, right?
What do you think the biggest one was?
This is a great question.
It
had to have been Goose Island, right?
Yeah, I would think. Or Elysian.
Elysian? Yeah. was going to be my guess, but I don't have their barrels.
I mean, we
offhand.
can do, like, this is on me for not doing this projection. You could do the math. You could look up, roughly what these annual production figures were and like chart it versus the overall craft volume. And you could figure out if they would have gotten there. I think not, even if you kept those acquisitions.
Yeah.
And I think maybe like Blue Moon would be the thing that tips the scales there, because some industry data reporting counts that as craft. The BA does not,
but that was never like BA sanctioned craft.
Fair.
We talked to Keith Villa on the podcast, the founder of Blue Moon. Listener, go back and check out. That was a double S episode, probably about 20 episodes ago in your feed. And what was interesting there is, in his recollection, Coors and the BA actually had like a pretty amicable relationship for much of, like sort of the early days of Blue Moon, right up until the point where they started excluding folks. I think like the Widmer defenestration in, I forget what, maybe 2005 when they joined the Craft Brewers Collective. So
Alliance?
CBA. Yeah, thank
Craft
you.
Brew Alliance, yeah.
It's changed
always
names like
forget that.
7 times. So whatever that one is. I think that was like where there was like a real hardening. And at that point, like Keith found himself like explicitly and definitionally on the outside. And was not thrilled about it for obvious reasons. I mean, he felt, I think, a little bit like they had been used a little bit for resources and legitimacy early on, and then kicked to the curb as just one more big beer interloper.
Well, so if we kind of took like a revisionist, like more consumer focused definition of craft, right? Like if we counted Blue Moon, if we counted Goose Island and Elysian and all the folks that, were no longer in the BA fold, like if we just took we took crafty brands from the large guy, like then we're probably close to 20%.
Yeah.
Then we're almost getting there. Maybe.
So what you're saying is, when things don't work out,
change the
move
goalposts. Yes.
Goalposts. Yeah. It's like, which I think is a good mantra for all of our listeners today. Is like, remember, all of this is arbitrary. None of it matters, including everything we're talking about today. So if things aren't working out in your life, just go ahead and revise up, at your discretion.
From like a drinker's
One
perspective.
day we will all be dead.
And with that, we turn our attention from Kate's moment of historical fascination, which was excellent, 20% by 2020, a trip down memory lane to just 9 years ago when the craft segment looked totally different. We turn our attention now to Jess. Jess, you get the Taplines time machine. You get the conch shell. Speak and load up your year of choice into the portal.
Well, Dave, we are going to the 18th century because it's called India Pale Ale because...
Yeah, where's the eject button?
I'm sorry. I wanted to troll you with your own memes.
So triggering.
No, we are going, get excited, to 1974. We are in Cleveland, Ohio.
I don't know. It's
We're
worse,
like, honestly, like, this is like just tangentially related to beer. But
good.
I think it's a great story. Combines my favorite thing, beer price promotion nights, with the great American pastime. And this is the 10-cent beer night as celebrated by the then Cleveland Indians, June 4th, 1974. You're both nodding as though I'm sure you know this story. So
Classic.
we will keep it tight here. I listened to a bunch of podcasts so that I could be ready for this. And all of them approached it from the baseball angle. And look, I love a baseball game. Some of my drunkest nights have included sitting somewhere at Fenway Park.
Over 21.
Oh, of course. And then, sending myself somewhere else within the city of Boston to God knows where.
Safely and responsibly, not behind the wheel.
Yes. Shout out to the Green Line.
Shout out to public transit.
Shout out to the MBTA. No. So I guess these promotional beer nights were really popular back then, and they still kind of are. One of my favorite things in my very misspent youth used to be beat the clock night at Bar Anticipation in Lake Como, New Jersey, which
wow.
Well, it used to be South Belmar, and then they were embarrassed at the name of Belmar and its association with other Jersey Shore clubs. But
I do like the idea that they aimed extremely high. They're like, instead of just like naming it something else, they chose Lake Como.
They could have been like North Spring Lake, but they were like, no. What's that place where George Clooney lives? Great.
Yeah. Okay, so
Beat the Clock Night beer starts at 25 cents. So
Okay.
I think it still happens. Beer starts at like 8 p.m. at 25 cents for a small cup. It's not big. You probably get like 8 ounces of beer, and
like
then
a
every
dentist like wash cup type of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. And then it goes up a quarter every hour.
People drink 19 of those every 10 minutes.
Bartenders love it.
You keep your stack going. And like I don't know. I think the last time I went was maybe 25 and was like, I'm too old to be here.
Right. Because everyone had just turned 21, listeners.
What?
Everyone had just turned 21. You were too old to be there because everyone was just one day over 21.
Dude, like they are so serious about underage drinking. Went with a group and somebody had lost their license, so she brought her passport and they were like, no.
That's a very Jersey bouncer really any bouncer loves to pretend they've never seen a passport in their life.
Well,
It's
many
just
of them probably
fun.
haven't.
Right. It's like, well, why? Like I check IDs, driver's licenses. I do not check other forms of ID.
And only New Jersey. Anyway,
okay,
sorry
so-
for this tangent.
So now we're
beer
back to 74. Yeah.
in Cleveland. Yes. So apparently these things were popular back then. And this was presented by Stroh's Brewing Company from Detroit, Michigan.
Sure.
The promotional price for the night, which was also a Tuesday, just like Beat the Clock at Bar A, 10 cents per beer for 12-ounce beers.
Whoa.
You could buy 6 beers per transaction.
And,
I didn't know that detail.
and
Yeah.
not break $1, right? You're like, keep the
You
change,
could buy
man.
a 6-pack for
Yeah.
60 cents.
Whoa.
What could go
Which
wrong?
is crazy. Right? So their normal price was, 65 cents per beer. And I checked out the inflation calculator. In today's dollars, that would have been $4.17 a beer.
Still a
now
good
they're
deal.
only at $5 a beer at Cleveland. I think it's like Progressive
Guardians.
Stadium. The Guardians,
Yeah.
But the 10-cent beer night, that was the equivalent in today's dollars of getting a 12-ounce beer for 64 cents, which is just bonkers bananas in general.
Wow.
So 25,134 fans turned out. That was about twice their usual crowd size. And people assume that about half the crowd was not drinking. So basically all of the extra people who showed up were just purely there for the beer. Did not give 2 figs about baseball.
Because at that point, it's just a good deal. Like, you can just ignore whenever I go to baseball games, I just ignore the baseball games and drink anyway. That's
the whole point.
Right. But it's way cheaper, even adjusting for inflation. Man, what a deal.
What a deal.
So you like this just purely because it was a very affordable, exciting promotion and everything went fine and everyone went home, right?
Everything was great. It was safe, family friendly, really a lovely evening.
You just love a deal. Yeah, Jess.
Yeah, I'm a beer bargain shopper.
Yeah.
No, but I did. So I sent you guys the report that I had found, which is where I got a lot of this stuff. So to paint you a picture of what the American beer industry was like at that time, in 1972, there were 59 companies brewing beer in the United States. So 2 years before this. By 1977, there were only 49 companies left brewing beer. So we lost like a good chunk of the breweries in the country. In 1974, Stroh's, our generous benefactor for this year promotion, had a 3% share in the U.S. They had a brewing capacity of 5.5 million barrels, which is not to say that they were brewing 5.5 million barrels per year. I'm not really sure what they were
But
brewing.
they
That's
could.
the one number but they could.
If anyone held a gun to their head, they could do it.
They could do it. They could brew 11 kegs worth of beer.
Right.
And this is just a fun fact, but in 74, they spent 71 cents per barrel on TV advertising. Not sure how much of that happened in the Cleveland market, but so that's like the state of the beer industry at
Which,
the
by
time.
the way, just to interject here, is quite low because right around this time is when Miller Lite gets introduced in 74 by Milwaukee's Miller, which was then owned by Philip Morris. listener, go back and check out our episode with Maureen Ogle about the beginning of the light beer wars for more on that. But like, this is right about the point when people at both Anheuser-Busch, the leader of both Anheuser-Busch and Miller, started spending like crazy on advertising. So 71 cents a barrel is very low. I don't have the in one of the books behind me that I have read. There's a chart for this, and Anheuser-Busch and Miller are both spending, I think, like at least $1 to $2 per barrel around this same time. So like Stroh's is hanging on at this point, which isn't necessarily germane to the story, but is kind of an interesting point here because people probably just showed up for the beer, not for Stroh.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't even think people were ordering it by brand name. But I assume instead of spending money on TV, they were spending their money on stuff like this.
Right.
All told, by the end of the night, 60,000 beers were poured, which I ran the math. That's about 362 kegs. Consumed
Incredible.
by like, I don't know, call it like 12,000 people.
Yeah.
Which is nuts. But, you know, to get into like what all happened of it all, the week before, the Cleveland Indians were playing the Texas Rangers, and they had a similar beer promotion night in Texas at that stadium, and, you know, got a little rowdy. The fans were throwing stuff at the Indians, and, you know, in a post-game interview, somebody asked the Texas Rangers manager, Billy Martin, if he was concerned about retaliation. And he said, quote, "They don't have enough fans there to worry about." Which then I think psyched the city of Cleveland up. And they all said, "We're going. See you on June 4th.
Right. The one thing you really can't do to people from Cleveland, like they know that Cleveland is not great. Like they're aware of all the negative stereotypes. Like the one thing you can't tell them is like, fuck you. Because then they get very upset.
Well, I mean, I also think this was probably like a few years after their river caught on fire.
Yes, 1969, the Cuyahoga River catches on fire, famously.
Yeah, inspiring
Infamously.
the need for the Environmental Protection Agency.
Cleveland was so polluted, Richard Nixon was like, yeah, we should probably clean this shit up. You know what? Maybe some government regulation is a good idea.
So if Cleveland is just like a hornet's nest and also a super fun site, and then they just poured tons of beer on it and are like, this will be fine.
60,000 beers.
Was it fine, Jess?
No, it was not fine. So things were just bad from the start. In the second inning, a woman leapt out of the stands and I want to say stood like atop the dugout and flashed everybody and then tried to kiss the chief umpire, Nestor Shylock, I believe was his name. And I feel like with that name, you are no nonsense.
Yeah.
He did not want to be kissed.
Second inning. That's too
Second
soon.
inning, right?
When did she get there?
I don't know. One of the podcasts I listened to in preparing for this, I believe it was The Dollop, went on about how she was this like heavy-set middle-aged woman. She looked like a mom. Maybe she was 40. And it was just like,
Whoa.
Like,
Dollop.
right? Also, like, I'm about to be 40 and I am also a mom. Like, I mean, I'm not about to go do that, but
I'm sure if you wanted to, you would like them to talk about the content of your character. Okay.
Right.
You know, let's have a little bit of decorum here, folks.
I mean, look, beers at Fenway Park are $10.50 each, so I probably couldn't afford to do that.
Yeah, well, is there like a Klarna type thing, like a buy now, pay later there that they've got? Like,
Afterpay.
Yeah.
So that happened. There were two more incidents of streakers. One of those streakers slid into second base completely naked.
Twisted off that Stroh's.
Somewhere around like the sixth inning, a father and son ran out onto the outfield to moon the crowd.
Hell yeah.
But somewhere in the second half of the game,
just
the beer
guys being
stands,
dudes.
the beer stands couldn't keep up. So they just drove the draft trucks out to like the field area that's behind the home run wall. So accessible to fans.
Right.
And everybody described these beer trucks as being staffed by two teenage girls who at some point were just like, fuck this shit, and left.
Dude, thank God they got out of there alive.
Truly.
Right? I mean, you know what, Dave? I want you to find one of them for a future episode.
They're probably traumatized. Why would they ever want to talk about this again? They survived like the storming of the Bastille, like from Marie Antoinette's perspective. Holy shit. Wait, so Jess, to your understanding, at by the sixth inning, the powers that be who were running the stadium hadn't decided that this was a failed experiment and they should cut it off. They just decided all right, the inmates are running the asylum now. Best of luck, everybody.
No, dude, they get to the fucking bottom. I'm sorry, I keep cursing. They get to the bottom of the ninth. And this is the inciting incident. We haven't gotten there yet. This kid who I found his first person POV story in Cleveland Magazine, which was excellent. I will send you both a link, but he says he was 19 at the time. He leaps from the stands and tries to steal the hat off Texas outfielder Jeff Burrows' head. He just thinks he's getting a souvenir, but he is so drunk from having consumed so many 10-cent beers that he just kind of knocks the hat off his head. And then here's what he wrote. I came up running behind him. He never saw me coming. I grabbed the hat right off the top of his head.
He definitely saw him coming, by the way.
I had it in my hand, but I dropped it. It landed right by his foot. He didn't say a word. Our eyes met. I looked at him, and he looked at me. He kicked me right in the thigh. I had perfect spike marks in my thigh. And so seeing this happen, Texas manager Billy Martin thinks that this was an act of violence, not just an act of thievery, and tells the Rangers to get out of the dugout with their bats and take the field.
Oh my God.
Because he thinks the fans are attacking them. Well, yeah, and then the rest of the fans ran onto the field. The fans were armed with chains, knives, firecrackers, and then they broke apart stadium seats to fashion clubs.
What?
The Indians run out on the field to protect the Rangers because they're like, oh God, our fans are going to kill these people.
We live amongst these monsters. Get back in the dugout.
Oh God, they have the seats again.
The head umpire was clocked in the head by part of a seat. He was bleeding.
Jesus Christ.
So the other thing was this kid who, starts the incident with the hat. I pulled this out of his little first-person POV. He's talking about the beer trucks in the outfield. Tables surrounded the trucks. The workers pouring the beer would fill up any container you brought them. I had a big Dog and Suds mug, maybe 32 ounces.
What the fuck is a Dog and Suds mug?
Who knows? Which ties into another one of my favorite Jersey Shore bar promo nights at the Surf Club, may it rest in peace. They used to have bring your own cup, and you could get it filled with Coors Light for $2. So we would go to Wawa and get the extra large 44-ounce soda cups.
Right.
I digress.
That's just smart.
Yeah. What a shit show. And the thing is, they didn't cancel 10-cent beer nights after this. 10-cent beer nights continued, but with a limit of 4 beers per person.
Well, that's because
that solves everything.
Beer is the drink of moderation, as we know. And what can a humble brewer do if someone wants to drink 100 of them for $10?
And pry a stadium seat out of the concrete. I'm just trying to think about physically what it would. Imagine being there.
I like thinking about whoever was running the MBWA at the time would be like, well, the dose makes the poison.
I mean, to be fair, imagine if it was 10-cent whiskey night.
Right. I mean, we would have a country. Yeah. Now we're going to get an email from Discus after this.
Celebrity appearance. Tim Russert was there. He said he went with $2 in his pocket.
And came back with 20 beers in his stomach. Yeah.
What was the bathroom situation? Imagine how much peeing is happening.
It's a very good question.
This is a great question, Kate.
You were in an open sewer by the third inning.
Yeah. Just. Ugh. I mean, just imagine being there. Blah.
Well, I think the field had it was probably, the stadium was only half full to begin with. So in theory, they should have
plenty of room to take a shit there. Capacity. Yeah. You can find any old corner to just coat and piss. That was very fun. Okay, does Stroh, did you come across in any, excellently researched, by the way, both of you, well done on the homework here. Did you come across any comment from Stroh's itself?
No.
As the fuel for this fire in Cleveland? For this river fire in Cleveland?
Pabst is just like, we would never.
You're right. Right, Schlitz is off like violating every fucking FTC ordinance, but it was like, look, I mean, even we got limits, you know, like
these
they're
animals.
like yeah, they're pushing like Budweiser trucks into like Los Angeles port, you know, they're like, but I mean, we would never, you know, do that.
I think Stroh's must have just been like Homer into the bushes because I don't see anything.
Wow. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because like that's one of the ones that I like always knew about, but I never have like really looked into. You've done an excellent job looking into it and bringing us. Did you know all of this beforehand, or do you feel like you learned a lot about
I learned
this
a lot.
event?
I knew of it, but
it's kind of it's lore. I mean, it is like one of the classic catastrophes in the beer business.
Well, yeah, and it just had its 50th anniversary, so I think that's what drummed up some renewed interest in it.
In my head, this and Disco Demolition Night were like the same thing. Like I mean, I objectively know that's not true, but in my head, they got like, I thought there were somehow steamrollers involved in this incident as well.
Because Disco Demolition was the Cubs, was it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So,
but that also devolved into rioting.
Yes, that one
what
was
the
more
price
like,
of beer on that night?
Right.
Unclear. Old style, paging, High Lemons. We have questions.
Presumably pretty cheap. Right, because that was right around when Old Style was coming on really strong because of the Anheuser-Busch strike, where Old Style started to be able to really get its talons in Chicago's bottom shelf. But that's a story.
Things.
That's a story for another time.
I thought about doing like the divestment of the Grupo Modelo brands that made Constellation what it is. And when I brought these up to my husband, who is a teacher of American history, he was like, would you want to bore everybody to death? And I was like, you're right. 10-cent beer night.
He does that in the classroom 5 days a week. He knows what that feels like. Yeah. Like it's like, yeah, you gotta shut up and play the hits, man. 10-cent beer night. No one wants to hear another fucking Michael Lewis style inside the boardroom hostile takeover spin-off story. Of course, maybe you do, Taplines listener. Maybe that's what you sign up for when you subscribe to Taplines, and we're so glad you do. So we'll have to track down someone who was involved in the 2013 spin-off of Grupo Modelo's U.S. assets at another time. Kate and Jess, thank you so much for what a treat. This was so fun. Thanks so much for coming, guys.
This was so much fun. Thanks for having us.
Do you have anything? I mean, you know, like Taplines listeners, of course, will go out and seek out your work. But before we send them off into the internet hinterlands to do that, do you have anything else that you would like to see Taplines track down for future episodes? I mean, Jess, you've put in your formal request for me to track down one of the teenage girls or then teenage girls who was operating the beer truck that got besieged by Cleveland Indians fans on that fateful night in 1974. What about you, Kate? Like, is there a Taplines episode that you've been itching for us to get around to?
This would be for an audience of one, possibly three, if the two of you listen.
Good.
But
well, we're dealing with like personal fascinations here. That's on theme for the episode.
In the Byliners group chat, we are constantly referencing the ABI Newark brewing plant with the flapping neon eagle, which as a kid, when I would like fly home from a vacation or something, like that's how I knew, like, all right, we're home. Like, there's the flapping eagle. I see it from the airplane window, and just like, like it closed, but like what's going on with that? I don't know. I need like an oral history of the Newark ABI facility.
Did it close?
Yeah, I think it's at least partially vacant these days. But it still has like an Anheuser. It has a Bud Light sign on it. I do like this is we all three listener are from New Jersey ourselves. I do like that, like, returning to Newark Airport, like, you're greeted with, like, a monument to fucking Newark's decay, you know?
Yes.
Like, from, like, on the flight path, you're like, oh, there it is, like, you know,
and it's not even charming, like, Iron City, like, something. It's just, like, a global mega corporation, but, like, kind of empty. But I mean, it was so cool how the neon eagle wings flapped up and down. I mean, when you're a kid, I don't know, it's cool.
How do
you
they
mentioning
do that?
The eagle makes me think of, like, I don't think I'm imagining this. Did they used to make pretzels?
Yes, they had
Yeah.
Eagle Snacks.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
owned Anheuser-Busch owned Eagle Snacks. They
And I
spun it
assume they were
off.
like served on airplanes.
I don't know. I'm assuming they were served wherever. I mean, this was the era of Gussie and then August Busch III, and they were, both very much envisioning like Anheuser-Busch as sort of a 20th century conglomerate. That's also when they owned the St. Louis Cardinals. It's also when they were investing heavily in, not heavily, but like they were investing in like the Busch Gardens sideline of the business.
Busch Gardens.
Yeah, and they launched like a seltzer company, like a non-alcoholic seltzer company at one point called like
So close, though.
Checker. Yeah, he almost had it.
Guys, oh, man.
I mean, Checker Seltzer walked, or I think it was called Chelsea Seltzer walked, so Bud Light hard soda seltzer could fucking fail. But that's a story. That's a story also for another time. Okay, so those are your requests. We take them very seriously here at Taplines. Jess, you'd like us to track down the erstwhile beer maid who had the unfortunate task of driving or getting the trucks out to the Cleveland Indians fans back in 1974. Kate, you want to know what happened to that Newark Anheuser-Busch facility? Listener, if you have answers to either of these two questions or any tips for us, find me. My email is readily available. Google, you'll see my face. You'll see my email below it. Reach out. We would love your help in tracking these stories down. We want to do right by our guests, always here on Taplines, and especially on these because these are my esteemed colleagues. Kate and Jess, thanks again so much for joining. A real pleasure, a trip down memory lane with you both. And I'll see you in the group chat.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave. This was awesome.
See ya. Taplines is recorded in Richmond, Virginia, and produced by yours truly and Darby Seaside, who, along with the talented Shane Farrick, composed our delightful soundtrack. Just listen to it. I also want to give a quick shout out to the entire VinePair team, and especially co-founders Adam Teeter and Josh Mallon, editor-in-chief Joanna Sciarrino, managing editor Tim McCurdy, and art director Danielle Grinberg, who designed our lovely Taplines logo. And of course, a big thank you to you, yes, you listener, for spending time with us week in and week out. We literally couldn't do this without you. I'm Dave Infante, and I'll catch you next time.